Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm Mike Leager. Imitation is almost a dirty word in the arts. It suggests a lack of originality and inspiration, and at the worst it implies stealing someone else's ideas. That's why the career of Gertrude Hoffmann is so fascinating. She was a prominent and talented dancer and performer of the early 20th century, a key figure in the history of variety entertainment in the United States. But she was also, as the book we're discussing today calls her, an imitation artist, who made her name by reproducing other people's work on stage. As our guest for this episode writes, in an era when remakes, remixes, and reboots dominate, we have room in our theater history for a woman who elevates imitation to an art. We're fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Sunny Stalter-Pace, whose book Imitation Artist, Gertrude Hoffmann's Life in Vaudeville and Dance chronicles the performer's life and work. Dr. Stalter-Pace is the Hargis Associate Professor of American Literature at Auburn University, and she's also the author of Underground Movements, Modern Culture on the New York City Subway. Sunny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, Mike. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's begin at the beginning. Gertrude Hoffmann goes on the stage at a fairly young age, and she gets her start in San Francisco. Can you tell us about her early life there and what the world of entertainment is like at that time?
Sure. One of the things I was really happy to learn as I did the research for this book is that San Francisco was basically the Victorian theatrical capital of the U.S. There were all kinds of shows, pantomimes, spectacular extravaganzas with hundreds of cast members, operas with lots of supernumeraries, marching around spear carriers. And Gertrude Hoffmann worked in a lot of those shows. She was the youngest child of 6, and her parents got divorced when she was pretty young, so she had to go out and make money. And the first job she got was, there was a call in the newspaper for 200 ballet girls for a spectacular extravaganza called the Merry Tramps. So she auditioned, kind of fudged her resume a little bit, said she had been in shows before when she had only seen them, and got cast. And then she entered into this really interesting world of spectacular performance and really worked her way up from, as low as you could get, a ballet girl in the background in a big marching chorus.
I understand that Hoffmann's family, you mentioned she's the youngest of 6. I understand that really throughout her life, they played a crucial role in her career, perhaps including a little bit later in life, her husband, Max. Can you tell us a bit about her personal life?
Sure. Her sister Rose was the first one who went to audition with her. She had a short career in San Francisco theater before she got married. But when Gertrude Hoffmann left San Francisco with a touring production, they picked up, well, I say Gertrude Hoffmann, but she's Gertrude Hayes at the time, Catherine Gertrude Hayes, named after her mother. But she met the musical director for the show she was working on called Night of the Fourth, and they got married. And this is Max Hoffmann. He's a Polish immigrant who'd lived in Chicago for a while and played the piano and was very interested in ragtime. So they ended up becoming sort of a package deal. They worked in stock, they worked in roof gardens where he would direct the music and she would stage the dances, the choruses, and sometimes perform in them too.
So she begins as one of, as you say, hundreds of dancers in a spectacular entertainment, maybe embellishing the resume a little bit. But then eventually her career really takes off when she starts doing celebrity imitations. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this was a period in vaudeville when every kind of imitation was something that fascinated the crowd if it was done well enough. You had, people imitating bird calls, people imitating different rides at Coney Island. I mean, just this kind of mimetic impulse that I don't think we really have as much on stage anymore. But one thing that was really popular in vaudeville acts was imitations of the acts of major celebrities at the time. And this had sort of a dual purpose. It was a way of getting to experience that act again, but also maybe making fun of the person for particular character quirks. And Gertrude Hoffmann had been sort of your classic soubrette before. She was, young and cute and kind of sassy. But the thing that ends up really clicking with audiences is when she does imitations in her vaudeville act. She did an imitation of Eddie Foy, dressed up in drag as Sister Anne in a weird show called Mr. Bluebeard, kind of clowning around, and an imitation of Anna Held, who was very coy and Parisian. And, part of the thing that was remarkable was being able to transition between those two things, like, doing a clowning drag performance and then doing something really sexy and coy right after, and showing, her range as a comedian.
So it sounds like celebrity imitations were fairly standard in vaudeville, but I kind of wonder, did that ever get Hoffmann in any sort of trouble?
Oh man, yeah, it did. It's an interesting transition because, early 20th century, it's pretty standard. You have people like Ethel Barrymore going and sitting in the back row at vaudeville shows and checking out how people are imitating her. It's sort of part of the game. Like, if you're a big deal, you're a big enough deal to have people do imitations of you. But that shifts, and been trying to figure out why it shifts. I'm still not entirely sure, but I think partly it's because vaudeville becomes a place where personality is your stock in trade. So when Hoffmann imitates Eva Tangway, who is this sort of firebrand, rock star, kind of wild girl of vaudeville, Hoffmann does the imitation and Eva Tangway gets really mad. They're supposed to be on the same vaudeville bill, and they were sort of jostling about who was going to go after who, and they end up fighting in the newspapers, sort of placing ads back and forth saying, you think you can put one over on people from across the pond, but I'm a real American and you can't mess with me, Eva Tangway. And Eva Tangway saying, you're just an imitator and I'm an original, and kind of a back and forth. So Gertrude Hoffmann ends up doing Eva Tangway impersonations at a theater across the street from where Tangway had performed the week before. It was just very silly. But yeah, people did start getting annoyed with the imitations when the thing that set them apart was their personality or their originality.
We've been talking a little bit here about vaudeville, variety entertainment in general. I'm just curious if you could give us maybe a little bit of the lay of the land. I mean, what does the industry that Hoffmann's working in look like in the early 20th century? What is she playing? What kinds of entertainment is being offered to audiences at this time?
Oh yeah, I love giving a kind of overview of vaudeville because it's such an important part of American performance, but it's not something that people are widely familiar with anymore. So Gertrude Hoffmann was, by this point, a fairly big star. In vaudeville, you had big time theaters where you only had to do 2 performances a day, and smaller time theaters where you had to perform your act more times over the course of the day and got paid a lot less. The big time theaters were booked through the United Booking Office. So it's sort of a monopoly if you wanted to play in the best theaters and the ones that were on really good routes. But when you got there, you would find out where you were on the bill. Structuring a vaudeville bill was really, kind of an art. You always would start with something that wouldn't get interrupted when people were coming in. So an animal act or acrobats or something like that. Then you want to build up to the first intermission, have somebody really good before the curtain, and then the second half of the show try to build up again, and the second to last spot, that was the headliner spot. But you could have any kinds of acts, animal acts, kind of skits and plays, dance. It was really a variety, and they tried to make it move as quickly as possible and have as many different kinds of acts on the bill as they could.
Yeah, just while we're talking about celebrity imitation, I understand that Hoffman at one point even imitates, I believe it's Annette Kellerman, who does a diving act.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really interested in the places where she performed in water. So imagine having to bring a full water tank on stage just to do a kind of gag in the middle of your act where you pretend like you're going to dive and then don't, pretend like you're going to dive and don't, and then you fall in and oh no, you're all wet. Although I think my favorite kind of excessive moment of imitation is there was one, oh, who was she imitating? It was Adeline Genet, who's a ballerina, who was doing a show at the time where there were several Mounties on horseback with her. So Hoffman does an imitation of this act with horses on stage for a 10-minute act in a vaudeville bill.
So Hoffman's doing these celebrity imitations, but she starts to do other imitations, sort of larger scale imitations, if you will. And one of the first that really puts her on the map is this dance called A Vision of Salome. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So one of the things that scholars of women's popular performance and dance have been really interested in the past maybe decade or two is this idea of Salomania. So after Oscar Wilde's play Salome comes out, it's very controversial, gets adapted into an opera, and then the figure of Salome kind of floats loose from that, and every solo female act has to include a Dance of the Seven Veils or a Vision of Salome type dance. Some of them are relatively highbrow and restrained, and some of them are basically burlesque dancers who have an excuse to do a striptease but just play kind of, Middle Eastern music with it. Maud Allen was performing her version, which she called the Vision of Salome, in London, and it was getting a lot of press. So because Hoffman was so good at imitating, Willie Hammerstein sent her over to London to watch Maud Allen do her dance and figure out how to do an imitation of it in New York before Allen could break her contract and come to America. And just whenever I tell this story, I think it's so amazing. Like, she got on a boat and went to England and watched this dance over a course of weeks so she could come back and do a copy of it in a roof garden in Times Square.
I think you write she saw the same production dozens of times or something, just to get every little detail down. I thought that was just fascinating.
It's one of those times where, her having that backstage experience as a dance director, stage manager really helps too, because she can sort of establish the scene. She gets a sense of the decor and the mood and the music, as well as the choreography for the dance.
Now, this sounds like it was an act that may have been a little bit risque for the time, and it wasn't the only case where Hoffman did something that might have been considered a little bit edgy for the times. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that. Did it ever get her in trouble? Did maybe a few of those scandals have a bit more to do perhaps with publicity than actual legal problems?
Yeah, people were somewhat scandalized by her Salome when she did it in New York initially. But these were sort of, sophisticated theater goers or people coming in from out of town and wanting to see something sort of from New York City. But when she went on tour, she toured the U.S. in a Schubert show called The Mimic World, doing her Salome, and people were pretty scandalized by that. They tried to get people to stop putting up even the posters that showed her dance. She came back to New York and did it again for another summer stint on the Hammerstein roof and got arrested pretty early on for that. They said, she wasn't wearing any tights. She was barefoot, and basically set her up with a prison matron who had to oversee her costume. But she did think it was probably set up for publicity either by her manager, Morris Guest, or by the managers at the theater. Because it was, it was kind of an old act by that point. She had played in New York for a whole summer. She had toured the US. So they needed something to drum up business.
So Hoffmann's kind of gone on this trajectory. She's gone from celebrity imitations. Now she's starting to reproduce this, popular Salome dance. And then at a certain point, her imitations kind of, I think it seems like they go to another level. She starts working with kind of modernist European art, Russian ballet, maybe most prominently. How did that whole thing work? And what was she offering to American audiences?
This is the thing that intrigued me enough when I found it out that I thought I have to write about this woman. She's so fascinating. Because she was responsible for the first production of several Michel Fokine dances that were performed by the Ballet Russe. She was responsible for the first American productions because when she and her family would go over to Europe on vacation, she has excellent taste. She goes and sees the Diaghilev's Ballet Russe performing in Paris and thinks, this dance is amazing. Tries to get them to come to the US. And they say, and again, like with Maud Allan, they say, no, we have a booking in London. We can't do it. So she decides, okay, I'm just going to copy them then. Gets help from one of the dancers who works with them to learn the choreography, gets the plates of the Leon Bakst costumes, has the very lush and intricate settings reproduced, and, tours the US with several dances as performed by the Ballet Russe several years before the actual Ballet Russe comes to the United States. And, this is one of those landmarks in modernism. This is like the epitome of modernist performance. So thinking about the fact that, before, video or something, that the way people in the US got to see this European modernist dance was through the medium of Gertrude Hoffmann and the people that she hired and trained. That just seemed really remarkable to me.
It does. It sounds like such an interesting process where almost a little bit maybe akin to like a Hollywood movie where American audiences might see the American remake of the original movie before they ever see the original. I'm curious. So let's just imagine for a second, we've got a time machine here. Our listeners get to go back and watch one of Hoffmann's performances, maybe of the Russian dance that we were just talking about. What does that whole sort of performance event look like? Not just what's going on stage, but just sort of the general atmosphere.
Well, for the Russian ballet, it was interesting. They tried to launch it in the summertime in New York City, and this was pre-air conditioning, so theaters were really hot. That's why you tended to have summer shows up on the roofs of theaters where people could get the breeze, be out in the air. But they're trying to perform it in these big stuffy theaters. So in New York, it was less of a success. But by the time they got to the Midwest, they sort of realized, okay, this is a big cast. We're losing money. So Hoffmann puts her imitations on the bill too. So you could go to a show. By the time she gets to the West Coast, to LA, San Francisco, around there, people think she's amazing. They talked about going to a show and seeing kind of very Orientalist, 1001 Arabian Nights type settings with draperies and rich fabrics and people in dazzling costumes, doing these kind of intricate and artistic dances. And then there would be a break and Hoffmann would come out and do her vaudeville act. And then you could watch another intricate and beautifully designed and completely professionally done ballet. So the closest thing I can think of to this kind of performance that we have now is maybe like seeing the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall. That kind of just completely overwhelming sensory spectacle that has a little bit of kitschiness to it too, but where you just have to admire how good everyone is at doing their jobs.
So bringing European modernist performance to American audiences seems like it works pretty well for Hoffmann. Like you said, by the time she reaches the West Coast with this tour, she's pretty popular. But obviously around 1914, World War I breaks out. That gets difficult. How does that affect Hoffmann's career and what she's able to offer to audiences?
Yeah, it's really different when she gets cut off from being able to go over to Europe and see the newest of the new kind of performances. The last big European modernist performance that she replicates is a pantomime by the German director Max Reinhardt called Sumerun, which had come to the US before the war, but she worked with the director who directed Reinhardt's Sumerun, and she performed in it. And, this, I talked about the kind of Arabian Nights feeling that some of the Russian ballets had. This one was completely Orientalist. She was in brown face, including her arms and legs, and playing a character called the beautiful slave of fateful enchantment. It's like an aesthetic that doesn't even, that's hard to even process today. But that's the last one that she does. And this is where critics kind of start to push back and say, she does a good job with this. It's really well done, but it's sort of too highbrow for vaudeville, but not highbrow enough to not be vaudeville. It doesn't really have a place because it doesn't have the wink and the nod and the elbow and the ribs that maybe her vision of Salome had that would make it appeal to a vaudeville audience. It doesn't have her imitation stuck in the middle. She's trying to do something really serious, and people say she does it pretty well, but when you have that established reputation as somebody who is comic and who puts razzle dazzle into things, it just doesn't work as well when you try to do something completely straight, I guess.
You were just talking about the Orientalism, the sort of broad stereotyping, this wildly inaccurate, frankly racist version of various Middle Eastern Asian cultures. Performers like Hoffmann presented this sort of thing in their acts. But one thing I did find kind of interesting is that it sounds like the story's a little bit more complicated when it comes to Hoffmann. Yes, there are these deeply troublesome, we wouldn't accept them today, portrayals of other cultures, but there's also this sort of running thread where she seems to be working with a number of non-white performers in her troupe, and I'm wondering how that presented a certain vision of the rest of the world, of other cultures to American audiences, and maybe ways in which it was a bit more complicated than the sort of straightforward, more problematic stuff that we might expect.
Yeah, one of the claims I make in the book is that Hoffmann's really important for bringing the kind of review structure that you would get in something like a Ziegfeld Follies to popular price middle American audiences. And one of the things she does with her reviews is she will always have an act that includes people from different places around the world. She had Sri Lankan dancers and musicians with her when she was imitating Ruth St. Denis dance. She toured with an opening act that was a Chinese magician, Chi Ling Kwa, whose daughter sang ragtime songs. So that to me is the kind of epitome of that cultural fusion that happens when you have, maybe exotic images being performed, but you have actual people from actual foreign countries that you're working with and touring the US with. There has to be some kind of interaction. And in fact, maybe the most interesting version of that is she shared the bill with a troupe of North African acrobats. There were apparently a lot of Moroccan acrobats and Arab acrobats that were popular in early 20th century variety performance. She had one troupe that she worked with a lot who also performed in some of the Russian ballets. They were supposed to be part of the Sheik's Guard or something like that, which ends up causing some really intense pushback in southern cities where she performed, and people wrote letters to the editor saying, I don't know if you know much about the South, but we don't like to see white girls dancing with, these dark-skinned guys. So yeah, it was interesting. Even though the exoticizing, the orientalizing was extremely problematic, it does lead to these really interesting kind of cultural mixing on stage that I love reading about and writing about.
We already mentioned how World War I affects what Hoffmann is able to offer to her audiences. She also eventually has to contend with the decline of vaudeville. I'm curious how the entertainment industry changes kind of in the post-war years, and how she kind of gets to one of the later acts in her life, which involve an outfit called the Gertrude Hoffmann Girls.
Yeah, I think people have studied the way that after vaudeville, those tropes and those performers go into film and TV. But one of the more understudied areas is how kind of big flash acts, dance acts, and spectacular acts end up migrating from the vaudeville stage to something like the floor show at a nightclub or a restaurant. And that's one of the places where Hoffmann really finds her niche. In the 20s, she has a dancing school and trains Gertrude Hoffmann girls. The Gertrude Hoffmann girls appeared in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1923. Groups of them go over to Paris and perform at the Moulin Rouge. And even into the 1930s, they're doing floor shows at hotels and nightclubs in New York. And the Gertrude Hoffmann girls are really interesting. Their show's a little bit risque, but also very skilled and very athletic. Almost like a proto Cirque du Soleil, where you have women working on aerial silks and moving in patterns, as well as tap dancing, toe dancing, and kind of precision dancing as a larger group.
You write, and I'm quoting you here, "This is the paradox of Gertrude Hoffmann in a nutshell. Throughout her career, her clowning and mimicking coexisted with her dancing. Her work as an artist and as a producer was restless and temperamental, forever seeking the newest style of performance and then challenging herself to copy it." So, given that quote, given your sort of analysis of Hoffmann and what she means, how should we think about Gertrude Hoffmann? To kind of go back to what we were saying at the intro, we think of art that imitates as being lesser or even bad art, but you keep pointing to how Hoffmann had this sort of genius that's really admirable. So what is her life, what does her career have to tell us today?
Well, one of the things I think it has to tell us is there's always a tension in popular performers between what they're really good at and what they wish they could do. And she had excellent taste when it came to high art, but the thing that people received the best was the humorous performance. So I was really interested in that tension. I think a lot of what it tells us is I think a lot of what Gertrude Hoffmann's life communicates is the way copying serves as a form of transmission and translation between cultures, and not even just between countries, but, being able to take a kind of highbrow performance to a middle American audience and make it something comprehensible and fun and enjoyable. I think that's a real skill, thinking about how to take something that's meant for one group and make it comprehensible to another one. I do a lot of that in teaching, I think. Trying to say, okay, this is how it felt to them. Now try to put yourself in this headspace. I think what we see a lot today is the idea of copying as parody. Any number of YouTube videos and little TikToks are about, okay, let's copy this dance that we thought was so serious in Save the Last Dance or something and show how it's actually pretty corny. And I really truly believe that copying is a way of figuring out your own voice, like who you want to imitate gives you a sense of who you are as a performer. And I feel like I really got a sense of Gertrude Hoffmann's tastes and talents and ambitions from the kind of performances that she copied.
We'll post additional information in our show notes about Gertrude Hoffmann's life and career, as well as info about Sunny's biography of Hoffmann. Sunny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please visit theaterhistorypodcast.net and follow @theaterhistory on Twitter. Just a note, theater is spelled THEATRE in our website URL, and it's spelled TER at the end in our Twitter handle. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.